All right, good.
Well, thanks for doing this, Joe. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So you have a pretty remarkable career in the sense that you are able to do exactly what you want to do and make it work.
Well, thanks. Thanks
Right?
for
I mean, this
noticing.
is like
Eh,
you're in a rare state of being able to play fairly niche music and make a whole experience out of it.
Uh, yeah, I mean, that's thanks for noticing. I mean, part of that is, yeah. I mean, I think I'm in my 60s now, and continuing to do it
Yeah.
for a long time means that I've already kind of accomplished some stuff I imagined doing a long time ago.
That's
I
pretty good.
already, yeah, I already had a kind of experience of almost being a big deal in jazz and getting a lot of press and getting in downbeat polls, and then deciding that I had to do some other stuff and having a lot of that fall apart, which meant that I sort of rebounded and had a much more, I guess, independent determination to like not even care about what anybody thought I ought to do. And that
Sure.
coincided with getting a teaching job, which started as one student every 2 weeks and gradually built up to being, a thing I could make a living at,
Yeah.
which meant that I only need to make part of my living as a performer, as a recording artist, as a musician, not just as a musician who teaches. And so I've tried to capitalize on that, freedom to just do what I want.
Yeah. Pretty good.
Yeah.
So we'll go back to the beginning real quick. So
Yeah.
how'd you get into music in the first place, and then how did you turn over the dark side into free improvisation?
The dark side is what got me into music.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I played trumpet when I was 11 in school. I had a terrible, like adolescence of being a truant and having all kinds of conflict in my life and family, and so it meant that my sort of education was really unstable, and so I gave up playing the trumpet because that was a school thing. And of course, this is during the 60s when the Beatles were big and the Rolling Stones were big. And 50 years ago, last month or in December, my friend Danny, who was like my best friend, was visited by his cousin Frank, who played guitar. That was when I was 14. And Frank showed me how to play some chords, and I gradually earned enough money, $100 really. My brother loaned me 50, and I earned maybe 50 or $60 doing odd jobs, and I bought the cheapest guitar and amplifier I could buy, and I started practicing. And we had a band that was pretty bad starting that year. It was like pre-punk bad. It was like,
That's the way to start, though. Isn't it?
Yeah,
That's
we
the way
just
to
did
start.
it.
We did the same thing. It's
yeah,
like,
right.
You just do it.
You just do it because you need to do it.
Yeah.
So that's the dark side part. Is like I needed to do it, and it made me happy. It made me think. In all this chaos I had around my life and my school problems and my family issues, and music focused me and gave me something to work on, and sort of taught me how to learn in a way that was, useful to me. And I got better at it. That was a thing. Like we played Beatles songs, and my friend Frank took the solos, and I sang and played the guitar. And then gradually I started taking solos, and then we played Rolling Stone songs, and I could play the solos on those better. So I played solos, which got me into playing the blues, which meant that I practiced and I learned about like major, minor pentatonic scales at different keys. Although first I learned them in just positions, and played the blues. And then I had other friends who were into some other kinds of music, and I got into Hendrix, which was, Hendrix died when I was 15. But around when I was 15, going on 16, I went to an alternative high school in New Haven called the Unschool of New Haven, which was a student-run high school. We had these crazy, Yaleys and other people, Harvard people who started this school. It was like a free school, which was a thing back then.
Yeah.
And we made most of the decisions, and we could study whatever we wanted. And so I concentrated on music, and I had all these friends who were into pretty sophisticated ideas about music. And we were down the street from the Yale School of Music, and we're in New Haven, which had a really great music scene. So I went from sort of playing blues and playing rock and wanting to be something after Jimi Hendrix, and then watching that kind of disintegrate into kind of bad Las Vegas kind of, glitter rock.
Sure, yeah.
It was like that wasn't that didn't hit me very well. Showbiz,
Yeah.
Gradually, well, at the unschool, we would improvise, and we would play with, bottleneck slides, and we were just, really literally sit around and smoke weed and play with a black light on and improvise.
Sure.
This is, 1971, so I was 16.
Yeah.
And
Just free improvisation.
yeah, we
in
just
that.
play. Maybe
Yeah,
we
just
have
play.
a couple of chords, or we jam on that, and at the same time, we're making tape recordings and like doing sound on tape. We're just being kids. We're just trying to be cool, being like psychedelic musicians, and that led to learning about Frank Zappa, and that opened up a bunch of things. Like the first time I heard about Cecil Taylor was from reading about Frank Zappa, because I heard about Buell Neidlinger, who played bass with Frank Zappa and also played with Cecil Taylor, and coincidentally was the first bass player at New England Conservatory, was responsible for that. Anyway, there's a lot to say about him, but because of that, it turned me on to Cecil Taylor. We got into playing jazz out of the real book. I took some guitar lessons with a guy named Tony Lombardozzi in New Haven, who's still around, and he and I were both Mary Halverson's teachers, which is an amazing coincidence. And then that sort of led to one thing. We got into Miles Davis and the electric stuff, and then from that we got into Coltrane, and then from that we heard about Albert Ayler, and from that we heard about Cecil Taylor, and then all that was even better. And then, am I going on too long?
No.
Okay.
It's great. Yeah. It's all very interesting the way that all of this is, you find something from something else, or what brings you into that world.
Yeah. And then in New Haven, we met Michael Gregory Jackson, who now goes as Michael Gregory, because of the obvious conflict, who was a guitar player who was connected to Oliver Lake and some AACM people, and just getting going. At the same time that we heard about the Art Ensemble of Chicago, which is why we noticed Michael, and at the same time that Wadada Leo Smith moved to New Haven. So Leo Smith lived in New Haven, which brought the AACM to our doorsteps and caused us to be interested in that. So by 1973, 74, late 73, I was still listening to Hendrix and all kinds of rock music, but also to Albert Ayler, to Coltrane, especially late Coltrane, which was really my favorite, to Cecil Taylor, to Stockhausen in the library, to going to Yale concerts of Stockhausen and Messiaen, and to the symphony on every Friday night to hear all kinds of stuff. It was free. I saw lots of improvised music around New Haven, and I started going to New York to the Village Vanguard. I got to meet Pharoah Sanders and Rahsaan Roland Kirk just by being there and saying hello. And so the whole thing sort of came together. And at the same time, like everybody my age, we tried to be kind of fusion guitar players, and we were all trying to imitate John McLaughlin, which was, this towering, monolith of like technical mastery. It was overwhelming to all of us. After Hendrix is like, okay, that's over. Now we have to do this. And I know there was a critical point that I remember, and I feel lucky to have remembered this, that while practicing hours a day to try to play like John McLaughlin and being okay at it, not good enough to think I could do it, but thinking, learning a lot and getting a lot of technique and trying to play standards and using modes and arpeggios over chords, a pretty simple way of playing changes and stuff like that, trying to do that, trying to play in time, things like that, trying to play with Miles Davis records and Coltrane records and all that stuff while practicing this McLaughlin stuff, working on scales and trying to be really fast, and I would get bored, and while my brain would kind of shut down, I'd start playing my own stuff.
Yeah.
And one day I just went, why am I trying to play like him instead of trying to play like me? I mean, if I really admire him, which I did, and all these other people so much, the reason I thought it sort of hit me that the thing that I admired the most about them, and I'm sure this sense was influenced by reading about Braxton and Leo Smith, people who said very similar things. If I was trying to be like him, I was sort of missing the point. The point was to try to be like me, but to try to make what I did as rigorous as anything else on my terms. And so from that point on, I've just tried to play like me.
Sure. Yeah. And that's really what draws us into all these people, it seems to me. Like the reason that we like
right?
Whoever, Anthony Braxton or Albert Eiler or Coltrane or any of this is that they've been able to find a way to sound most like themselves.
That's it. I mean, I think that's it. I think that's missing more now than it was then. Like a lot of things back then in the 70s, there was a very open idea about how to draw things from music. Lots of people did it. McLaughlin was drawing from Coltrane, but also from Indian music and Miles Davis, and Braxton was drawing from Stockhausen and Webern, and also Lenny Tristano, and Ives was having his centennial in New Haven, and they played all of his pieces.
Oh, man. Yeah.
There was just tons of stuff. You go to the record store, and there'd be sections of music, and we looked at all of them, and we went and listened to records, and kind of spaced out on the music. We had a real emotional connection to all of it. Like it was how we defined ourselves as young people.
Sure. Yeah. I had a similar experience as a kid, and it drew me into all kinds of different, like to me, Art Blakey was our punk rock in a certain way.
Really?
We had this whole experience of those of us who knew the stuff, it was like a visceral thing. But to a lot of other people, jazz or improvised music or whatever was kind of an academic experience.
Right.
It sort of went in that direction of, we learned this in school and we have to do it. But to me, it was always about that. And I sort of retain that, but I wonder if we've gone in a direction in music education where it's become a lot about you have to know the rules and you have to follow these particular things. It makes it hard to let's say, pursue your own voice to the greatest degree if you're told at every angle that, you have to be able to do this specifically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a balance there, of course, to be able to play and to have the technique and everything. But
I mean, I have to say, I was disappointed when I got into playing jazz and finding out that a lot of people in it had that idea. Even people I really admired, they would kind of, they were kind of, straight in their point of view, even though their music was pretty far out. That was kind of disappointing, and it was really disappointing. I felt really left out. I mean, I still do in a certain way, in a big way, from most music scenes, because I didn't go to music school.
Mm-hmm.
I'm self-taught. There's a sort of sense that there's a right way to do stuff. I kind of upend that a lot. Like a lot of times as a teacher, I get a first year guitar student or something. I might say, so who do you think is the best guitar player? Just to find out what these people are interested in. And, it's not uncommon for people to say, well, Jim Hall is the best guitar player, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to say. He's a great guitar player.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, well, you realize that Jim Hall invented that, and they look at me like I'm out of my mind, but Jim Hall invented that.
Invented what Jim Hall did.
Yeah.
Sure.
Jim Hall invented what people perceive as the right way to do it.
Sure, yeah. And it's the same way with all of our heroes.
Yeah.
It's like all
Miles
these people,
Davis, he invented that.
He just came up with it, right.
Yeah, he figured it out.
Yeah.
It wasn't like there was a law that he was trying to live up to or some scientific formula that was supposed to be followed in order to be correct. These are creative inventions by people that become, the sort of aesthetic, technical imperative that other people who don't allow their imagination to have any sort of say in what they do, that they just follow to think that they're doing it right, to be involved.
Sure.
And that ends up overwhelming the other thing. And I guess to go back to what you first said about me seeming to be able to do whatever I want, I'm determined to just keep doing that.
Yeah.
I feel like it has to be retained.
Sure.
Otherwise, it's over.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not like I'm the only one holding it down. There's loads of people out there doing that. But um, as I am determined to keep doing what I feel like doing.
Sure. Yeah.
It's only music, you know.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's not brain surgery. Like no one will die if my music is terrible or incomprehensible to people.
Yeah.
No one will be injured. Some people's sensibilities might be hurt, but that's good.
Yeah, that's for the better.
That's what we're supposed to
that's
do.
what you want.
Right.
Right, of course.
That's
yeah.
what we're supposed to do.
All right, so you're in New Haven. You're 17, 18, whatever it is, 16, 17, 18.
Yeah.
What's the path now? Did you say to yourself, I want to be a professional musician? And how do you go about doing that? Because it's not an easy thing.
No.
Certainly if you want to say, all right, I'm going to play in a wedding band, or I'm going to be the guy who plays guitar for the, Temptations or something like that. It's a different vibe. But if you say, I'm going to pursue an artistic path,
Yeah.
what was your move? How did you make that work?
Well, it's important to know that by that time, by 15, 16, and this is no slight on my parents who did the best that they could with me, I was supporting myself and working. And by 17, I dropped out of the alternative high school and got a full-time job at a hamburger joint.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had already moved out of my house. In a lot of ways, I think of myself as like a feral kid.
Sure.
I really, there was reason for me to be on my own, but I was on my own. I had, my parents weren't capable of giving me basically any kind of support, even though they were beautiful people. They couldn't do it. And so it was a matter of like surviving day to day and working. So, my sort of goal was partly just to crawl up from the very bottom. I would say that the only thing that kept me from being on like in a worse situation was, quite frankly, the fact that I didn't have to be, I wasn't shut out of opportunities in life because of, my race or anything like that. As a white kid, I could get a job and I could walk down the street without people being suspicious of me. Otherwise, it was pretty low.
Yeah.
And so I just worked. I worked and I tried to sort out what was going to be the thing to get me out of that situation into something better. And at the time I was like when I was a little kid and a teenager, I was pretty funny and I was a really good mimic. And I was really interested in movies and I read books about film and I was really into art. In New Haven, we could go to the Yale Art Gallery and stand in front of, Jackson Pollock paintings, at like 15 years old for free. And I did that a lot. And I was trying to figure out which artistic direction was right for me. And it just seemed to me that the free jazz thing was the best one because it was the most do-it-yourself. Sure. This was pre-punk music. There was no punk rock then. That came a little bit later. And there's a chance that if I had not gone the direction I went in, I might have gone to that. Although I didn't really, the sort of, motorcycle jacket kind of punk guy kind of vibe didn't really appeal to me,
sure,
like artistically or socially.
I
was much more of a kind of a psychedelic kind of person. I wasn't really, I mean, I looked like a hippie, but I wasn't a hippie. I was more like a long-haired beatnik in a lot of ways.
Sure.
I liked that more. And
yeah,
and I was interested in positive things like art and, words and music. And when I found out things like Albert Eiler and when I discovered that people like Leo Smith were making their own records and that you could really kind of direct yourself completely in this area of music, I just decided, like, I remember making the decision, I'm going in that way and I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to work really hard to try to succeed in that.
Yeah.
And it was like a very clear decision. And I mean, it's really kind of audacious and like crazy and insane. But I would say by the time I was 18 years old, I had from influences I had this sort of idea that I was going to be, a free jazz guitarist, which was not a thing you could declare about yourself back then. There were a few people in the world who did it. And I still thought there were things that were going on in it that hadn't been done, and I worked really hard to draw on the influence that I didn't influences I thought weren't being used by some of those people.
Sure. Well, give me some examples of those.
Well, there was Sonny Sharrock, who was great, and
Yeah.
there was Derek Bailey, two, kind of opposite poles of that. And, I worked really hard to understand what they were doing and to find what they weren't doing.
Yeah.
There were people who would compare me to both of them, which I take as a compliment, but they would compare me negatively, of course, which I also take as a compliment.
Sure.
And I drew on different things, and so I had this kind of ridiculous idea that I would build up this way of playing the guitar that would probably give me a gig.
Sure.
It's insane.
But at this point, you're saying to yourself, what can I do to craft my own approach that's going to sort of forge my own path through the thing, or the
Exactly.
path less traveled, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So what was it that they were doing that you, I don't know what the best way to put this is, but what was it that they were doing that you either wanted to do, or where did you find that open space? Like, what was it that you were thinking about?
I'll tell you exactly.
Great.
Sonny, who's great, is essentially a free modal guitar player. It doesn't mean that he's worried, that he's concerned with playing a Phrygian mode or a Dorian mode. But the fact is that his playing was modal, in that you could hear that there was at least an implied root. Okay, so it's kind of post Coltrane, which I love, and I admire anybody who can play like that. And Sonny Sharrock was incredible, but there were also loads of modal guitar players in that period. John McLaughlin being the towering, monolithic master of that. So that was covered. To do it in the free modal kind of way, well, that was Sonny's. It was Sonny's space. Derek, on the other hand, was basically using sounds and using harmonics and what I already knew at the time were called, extended techniques. And so one of them has a driving sense of pulse, late modal jazz, free jazz, driving sense of pulse, some Albert Ayler sort of stuff in there, of course, which is great. And not to diminish or simplify any of that at all, but it was identifiable. I could define it as being a thing, especially in contrast to other things.
Sure.
And then there's Derek, and at the time, I might feel a little bit differently about it now. There's sort of like no pulse, and there's like not about melody, and it's not about energy, and it's not about groove, and it's not about drive. So there's a bunch of extremes. The thing that I found that wasn't really being dealt with at the time was Cecil.
Okay.
On the guitar. And, flash decades ahead, I had a conversation about this with Cecil Taylor, and he's like, well, what about Sonny Sharrock? Or he would say, well, what about Sonny Sharrock? And I said, well, Sonny's like a free modal guitar player. And he went to me, and you? And I said, well, I'm trying to deal with unit structures. I'm trying to deal with you and Jimmy. And so Jimmy Lyons was like my hero, early from 20 around on, and for a long time, but also Eric Dolphy.
Yeah.
Because guitar players didn't deal with Eric Dolphy. And while other saxophone players of the time, the alto players, there was this huge expansion of music from the alto saxophone. You got Ornette, you got Jimmy Lyons, you got Dolphy, you got later on, you get Braxton, Roscoe Mitchell, you had Oliver Lake, you had Julius Hemphill. There's just all this stuff going on. And I'm thinking, where's the guitar players dealing with this stuff?
Sure.
And, again, to give credit to someone like Michael Gregory Jackson, he was dealing with it, and he had his own area he was dealing with. And so I don't want to go into that. I want to leave people alone out of respect for what they do. But I didn't think that anybody could really do unit structures on the guitar.
Sure.
So I worked for a really long time. Once I figured that out, I was like, I know what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And the first record I ever made, which was in 1983, is shows that. There was a bunch of things that had kind of a blues sensibility, but were also sort of a unit structures kind of thing. And I was really influenced by Leroy Jenkins, the violinist, and the Revolutionary Ensemble, his group, and by Threadgill and Fred Hopkins and Steve McCall, their group Air was hugely important to me. And so I found some things that I thought informed my way of thinking that were connected. And of course, Albert Ayler was big in that. But it's very hard to play like Albert Ayler on the guitar because, it just, you need breath.
There's a lot of air.
There's a lot of air. But those things were present in the structure, in this sort of methodology that was being used in all that music I just mentioned. And
Sure.
So, and a lot of it comes from Cecil Taylor. I mean, most of it, and Sonny Murray and Jimmy Lyons. And so
Yeah.
I kind of did in a way what I later learned Steve Lacy did, which was I took a lot of the principles of that and I started composing things to put myself in more specific, more personal kind of situations so that I had a kind of general methodology I worked in, and then I composed things to make specific sort of templates to work off of in my own composition. And then I started thinking about building up a whole sort of support system for my guitar thing, which again is the kind of thing I learned. And, you know, worked my job as a cab driver or a bartender or a house painter or a babysitter or a construction worker. I worked as a technical assistant at a film company. I became a piano mover and a furniture mover and a truck driver. And, you know, I did every kind of work I could do to support my determination to be a musician. So like I was saying before, I decided I was going to be a free guitar player, and which wasn't a thing really at the time. I had friends who told me about New England Conservatory, where at the time Rand Blake was like a kind of beacon of some different thinking.
Yeah.
You know, I think he still is, but at the time there was him, there was Bill Dixon. That's it.
Sure.
There was nobody teaching anything like that. So
Yeah.
I couldn't have gotten into NEC, but I thought, man, that's a cool place. And you know, I noticed that people I admired like Don Cherry and Anthony Braxton and, you know, Coltrane and people like that, they had like regular lives. They had families and kids, and you see pictures of them with their kids.
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute, you could do this and have like a regular life, have a happy family.
Yeah.
And, you know, in high school, I would come out here to Guilford, where I live, because we knew people that lived out here, teachers from the school and relatives of some of the students. They lived out here out in the woods in these like kind of weird houses, and they were artists and writers and stuff. And so by the time I was like 17, which is, you know, when I had already dropped out of school, I had this idea, well, I'm going to be a free jazz guitarist who has a family. I'm going to teach at New England Conservatory, and I'm going to live in Guilford, Connecticut. And I can't say there was a point where I planned any of that to happen except the guitar thing. But the guitar thing made all those other things happen.
That's amazing.
It's amazing. It really, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. The NEC thing is an absolute miracle.
Sure. Yeah.
And, you know, it's one of the reasons I take it so like as such a precious thing, because it's like a miracle. But I actually did imagine those things. So I guess part of it is just imagining that some of these things mean something.
Sure, and can happen.
Yeah,
and
it can
NEC
happen.
is still an amazing place for that. I mean, that was NEC was the only place that I applied to go to grad school because
Really?
I knew that they had a free jazz department. Essentially, that there was free
Wait,
music.
I'm
within
the
thing.
free jazz
You're the
department.
guy.
Yeah, well,
You're
no,
the
there's
guy.
a little
but
bit
there's
more.
also,
Yeah.
I mean, there's
Other
a whole,
people do it too.
But it's
Yeah.
open. You know,
Yeah,
the
there's
Rand Blake is
yeah.
still there. You know,
Yeah.
the legacy
Lots of different versions of it,
George
yeah.
Russell and of
Yep.
you know,
There's
it's definitely true. Yeah.
There's a theoretical component that's held by individual people there who'd share it with others, with
Yeah.
students. And that's really what the place is about. Hank Isnetsky, who's the department chair of contemporary improvisation, he says things like that a lot in meetings and stuff. And, you know, he's not exactly Mr. Free Jazz. At the same time, everything he does, like everything everybody else does, goes to the collection of information that the students are supposed to gather to develop their own way of dealing with things.
Sure.
And, you know, everybody there is pretty much like that. And it holds that and has resisted a lot of the sort of trends that have come down to make jazz more formal. There's a little bit of that there. To make jazz more based on philosophy, there's a little bit of that there. But they don't kick in more. It's really like, here's a way to do it. Here's a mode of practice. Here's another way of thinking about how you. Here's some examples. It's a pretty open forum kind of about music.
Sure, and it I think the whole atmosphere of the place encourages trying to search for your own voice in the music.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about that in faculty meetings. It's in the literature.
Yeah.
And, you know, part of it is like we get students like you, these, you know, monstrously strong musicians that come there. What do? You either ruin the student by saying, you're wrong, here's what you're supposed to do, or you
Right.
add something else to what they do.
Sure.
And I know some of that ruining might be going on, but I think everybody's expectation is that they'll tell you what you know, what they know, and that you'll figure out how you want to use it.
Yeah.
Which is like kind of exactly what I did. You know,
Sure.
I
Yeah,
just encountered a lot of different things, and ultimately, I was lucky enough. I mean, not, you know, some people would think that that's a crazy way to put it, but personally, I was lucky enough to find something that I could self-direct, and I could evaluate. I could evaluate the progress I was making, and I
On your
could
own terms.
on my own terms, and um, you know, it's still going like that. It's more like that. I would say in the last maybe 5 or 6 years, I've determined to remind myself all the time to be exactly the way I was when I was 18, to have it be a mystery. But at this point, I have a better way to facilitate the use of that mysterious part.
Sure, yeah.
You know, I have microphones up here in this space. I have opportunities to tour and perform and to release records and to get press and things like that. People ask me questions and I can talk to students. So the more I investigate the unknown in my own music, the happier I am. And I guess that goes back to your first question, or your first statement, like how, that I have a lot of things going on my own terms. Part of that is following my heroes who did that. And the other thing is assuming that at a certain point, I'd have to be my own hero. And
Sure.
I have
Yeah,
to just do it. I have to just do it and take the
Yeah.
risk of failure.
Yeah. And it's an interesting point because I think it's not easy to maintain. I think we all have that idea of like that first time you heard that record when you're 18, or like the excitement of it in the beginning, and then you get into the let's say routine of playing music and the different music that you're trying to find, and it's easy to fall into habits and forget about that energy or the spark that brought you into it in the first place. But it sounds like what you're talking about is that idea of investigating the unknown, of just trying to push forward into realms that you're less familiar with, or that you can try new things or reignite the concepts or whatever.
Yeah, I think it is. And I've seen that happen with a lot of people. Like I didn't learn to play wedding gigs.
Sure.
I'd had friends who did that, and I thought it was better for me to, bang nails than to do that, because I had an idea that of what I wanted to do, and I thought it would kind of get kind of worked out of my system if I didn't work on it all the time. So in that way, I would say I probably missed some opportunities to play that I would have enjoyed. And I never looked down on it. I never thought, oh, those idiots are playing weddings. I always admired people who could do a lot of things that I could do them. I could do them now. I could do them in the last, 25, 30 years. But at the time, I probably couldn't have done them. And, I was a little bit strict about what it was I wanted to do. But then I started coming in contact with better musicians and more musicians. I mean, there's never been that many people that want to do what I do anyway. But I got involved with more versatile musicians. And, I always respected people doing a lot of different things. But I have seen that a lot of them maybe don't step out of what's working for them to do the thing that they imagine might work for them quite enough. It's a bit of a problem.
Sure. Did you ever worry that doing the day, like regular day gigs, was going to take away from your ability to play music, or did you ever run into problems with that?
Yeah, it was a constant problem. It's been a balancing thing until I got the teaching job, because you shut off a part of yourself to go to work, you know, and maybe there's somebody there. Like, I mean, I was a furniture mover and a piano mover. I was around a lot of musicians who were doing that for money, and they talk about music, and, some of them were rock musicians or folk musicians. Some of them played like straight ahead stuff, but they were musicians. And so you could kind of be yourself. But I also worked around a bunch of people who, would equate me being a musician or being sensitive to anything in the arts as a reason to let loose on their homophobia, which was like a big thing, their macho stuff.
Weird.
And I had to spend a lot of time around people who were not cool.
Sure.
And that was pretty rough. the physical part of it, I didn't mind. I kind of liked a lot of it. I liked I like working hard, and
Yeah.
I didn't mind that. But the social part of it was tough. It was, it's threatening to people.
What do you mean?
Well, I think being the kind of person that I am and wanting to do what I want to do can threaten people. It can threaten musicians. It threatens musicians. It threatens a lot of people aren't musicians. Some people aren't like that, but I found like Boston was a particularly tough place to be just myself. And, people would say, even when I was working and making records and going on tour of Europe, neighbors would say, "So what do you do?" And I say, "Well, I'm a musician." They go, "Oh, you can't make any money at that." And
Yeah.
they'd say things like that.
That's kind of a universal though. But
Like who would ever talk to people
of
like
course.
that?
Yeah.
And then other musicians would say, "So what do you play?" And I tell them, they go like, "Pff, nobody likes that," or like, "You'll never get anywhere doing that." And I'm not saying any of them are wrong, but it's all been kind of brutal to deal with.
Sure. Well, you have to have your own. You have to have constant conviction in what it is that you're doing, which isn't easy when there's no external support for it in some respects. Or
Yeah,
when
you have to
you're
build
fighting
up the
people all
support.
time.
Yeah, you have to do the whole thing yourself.
Yeah.
I think maybe this is what a lot of young people don't get as a kind of opportunity. Although I know I tell them a lot, you improvise the whole thing. You improvise the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's not just about improvising the music on the stage.
Sure.
You improvise the direction you take. You improvise the configuration of a group of people you work with. You improvise where you get to perform. Sometimes things that are already established are there for you.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is, that's how this whole thing happened forever. And if you trace it back to its origins to African American people, they had to improvise everything. I mean, how to get food, how to survive, what a family configuration was.
Sure.
What their sense of history was, a transportation system, a wedding ritual, a funeral. They improvised everything. And so we're following that. And obviously there's a thing in that is incredibly, profoundly humane to me.
Yeah.
And so that's what I like about it.
Sure.
And as a kind of feral kid who was already at the rock bottom at 14 years old, I can tell you that having heroes and teachers who were born into a worse situation, they could be the greatest people on the planet, but they had to overcome this incredible limit put on them due to racism.
Sure.
That they did this and had such a high-minded, elevated sense about its purpose and its value to people, that those were my heroes, is really what totally drove me into this. Like, I would never think, well, yeah, but they have millions of dollars and they can do whatever they want. I was like,
right. Yeah.
Here are people who are like gonna do this thing because it means something to them.
Sure.
And it means something to their survival as a person. And I mean, over the years I've learned, so many of my heroes, they had no money or they struggled way harder than I ever did, and they worked other jobs and they, never got a gig, and they died very young. So I keep that kind of thing in perspective every day, all the time, that like I'm trying to be involved in a thing that I think is really like high human endeavor with a tremendous amount of dignity attached to it.
Yeah. All right, so let's go back a little bit.
Yeah.
So you're now saying to yourself, how do I play unistructures on the guitar?
Yeah.
What's the methodology? Because everybody understands the methodology in trying to play bebop or trying to learn how to play over changes or transcription, and then trying to glean your own sound from your influences and various things like that. How did you in that stage go to say, okay, this is what I'm trying to. This is how I'm going to approach the sort of practice of it or the methodology involved?
Well, I listened to everything I could find, and maybe being a mimic, like I could tell jokes and imitate Groucho Marx and, W.C. Fields and things like that back then, imitate everybody around me. I had good ears.
Yeah.
So, I start to notice things that happen, and I can't say I could describe them then, but I also read everything anyone ever said about it. I read what critics wrote about it. I read what Cecil Taylor said about it. I read what Jimmy Lyons and Andrew Cyrille everybody. I read what Anthony Braxton said about Cecil Taylor's music. I read everything. I'm like a hardcore scholar of this stuff in a very do-it-yourself way. I'm a big fan of it. This is like what I do. So
Yeah.
I just immersed myself in every little bit of information I could get. And I played along with the records. I mean, the reason I thought I could do anything was because I put records on and played along with them.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't think I could have played Giant Steps when I was 18, but I could play along with One Down, One Up on New Thing at Newport because I put the record on and played along with it and tried to copy what Coltrane did. So I could play along with the stuff, and then I started kind of figuring out what it was and reading what Cecil said and listening to. I think for me, the thing that really helped me to understand Cecil, and I use this example with all of my students when I talk to them about unit structures, is listening to Jimmy Lyons play alto saxophone with him, because the clearest example of how melody is used and how that melody is improvised on, or what I would say processed, how those melodic structures are expanded upon is very, very evident in Jimmy Lyons' playing. So I mean, if you want to understand bebop, you listen to Charlie Parker.
Sure.
You could listen to some guy that you heard at the bar down the street play like Charlie Parker, but that's like the last little drip in the farthest tributary off the smallest river.
Right.
If you go to the big river, there's more information there. And so I drew a lot on Jimmy Lyons, and I tried to, comprehend how he made a phrase and tried to play like him.
So, but it's a fairly organic approach. It's the idea that you're going to sit down and just try it out over and over, trial and error, just try different things. And
There was no other way to develop it. There was no, unless you went and studied with Cecil or took lessons from Jimmy, which I didn't even know was possible until 1984 when I met Jimmy and I met some people who did take lessons with him. I didn't know that was possible. There was no one who could tell you. There was no one to study that with. I mean, when I was thinking about becoming a guitar player, I already had this in mind. And at 18 years old, when I would have gone to a conservatory, there was no one. I wasn't going to walk in and go, "Hey, I'm really into trying to play the guitar like this," and have anybody do anything but laugh me out of the room.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the reasons I suppose I try to be so completely welcoming and accommodating to every one of my students based on what they bring to me, because it's an idea that could be really important. If you crush it, it's over. I wasn't going to let anybody crush me. Part of my feral self-raising kind of upbringing is that, I don't take a lot of grief.
Sure. Yeah.
And I wasn't going to let anybody stop me just because they thought I was wrong. I would just walk away from it. So there wasn't any other way to do it except to do it, by ear.
Sure.
And to figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, even today, I find it interesting that in the world of, let's say, conventional modern jazz music, you have to be able to play bossa novas, bebop, modal music. There's a whole spectrum, from early Ellington to, contemporary whatever. And yet, let's say like The Shape of Jazz to Come came out in 1959, and still almost nobody can tell you what's going on. I was searching for that when I was a kid, but into undergrad, I was like, I'd transcribe this stuff, I'd listen to it over and over again, but nobody could tell me what was happening.
Yeah.
Even now, I don't think there's a lot of schools that are going into it, or people who really. I mean, you actually literally wrote the book on the properties of free music.
Well,
but
yeah,
there's not a lot of people doing it to this day.
No, and it's on them. It's on them for that. And that book's been out for 8 years, almost 8 years now. So, and it's not as if, I mean, it sells pretty well for a book like that. And there's a lot of people around the world who read it, and I hear from a lot of them. But I don't see it being used regularly anywhere. It's used in colleges, and some people use it. Taylor Hobynum, who teaches at Dartmouth, uses it a lot, but he's also somebody that really understands that. So he's the one other person I can think of in the world who could teach the stuff I teach, because he knows it very well. And I mean, I think that's a kind of it's a disgrace, really, that academia. And I'm not somebody who slams academia, because I think it's amazing that people can learn how to play bebop. They did that. People figured that out.
Yeah.
But partly they could figure that out because it's based on harmony.
Mhm.
And that's what I said in Perpetual Frontier: The Properties of Free Music. My book is that we're talking about stuff that is not based on harmony,
Right.
and so there's no Western rule to govern what this is, and so institutions follow these Western rules, and they might say, well, we love Duke Ellington and Miles Davis and Wayne Shorter, and they do. But really, what they can understand about what they do is the stuff based on harmony,
Yeah.
because there's rules about that, and
Sure.
there's endless analysis, and it gives them a context to work in. I think the properties of free music defines the context to understand these other things, and and it's not like I define what the artist I speak about did. They define that,
Mhm.
but that the Cecil Taylor's explanation of his music isn't taken seriously by academics. Ornette Coleman's explanation of harmonics is not taken seriously by academics.
Mhm.
They try to explain those things based on their limitations. They don't take these artists at their word.
Sure.
I take them at their word.
Yeah.
When Ornette says we transpose our melodies through the clefs, the fact is, if you do that, you sound like Ornette. If you don't do that, your music's going to be modal because it's going to have an implied root. Ornette is trying not to have an implied root.
Yeah.
So people will say, well, what Ornette means by that? No, what Ornette means by that is he transposes his melodies through the clefs. So
Yeah.
if you want to understand Ornette, take the man at his word. If you don't take the man at his word, there's a problem.
Sure.
And that's perpetuating a very deep systemic problem that exists in the arts and in institutions, in the critical establishment, and in business related to music. That it's fine if you do. I mean, every African American musician can tell you this. It's fine if you're inside the lines. You do what's inside the line. You step out of the lines, it might be okay, but you're going to have to somehow prove it in a way that you would never have to prove it if you're a white person
Sure.
with a doctorate from some music school or something.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to have to do that, because the notion that people who are outside of who are in our society are like the other, that they're going to determine what's going to happen in music, is like an affront to people who want to control it. And part of that is, that's the point.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
point.
yeah.
That's the point, right?
Right.
Like, let's upend that, because that's part of the system that allows everybody to be horrible to people. Like, let's upend that. One of the things that I got from listening to Coltrane and reading about Cecil, and this is what I learned. Like, when I'm 17, 18 years old, it wasn't just I'm going to be a guitar player. I don't have a career goal. I'm a human being trying to contend with all the things going on in the world, with the war in Vietnam. And I was up for the draft. Fortunately, I got a high number, so I didn't have to go to Vietnam. The economy was in the toilet in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
There's no future. You weren't going to get a job at a factory or with a corporation. Interest rates were 17%. You couldn't buy a house. So we're dealing with the whole thing. The question is, what helps us to understand how to get over this? I found that in jazz music, a lot of the information was there. Pay respect to different people, change the way society functions so it doesn't restrict certain people, so it includes people. It's not a political thing. It's like a human thing.
Sure.
Like, we treat each other respectfully.
Yeah.
And, I just went on the idea that if I could do something that contributed to that kind of idea, maybe people, in a tiny microscopic way, it might influence the possibility that people murdered each other less.
Yeah, right.
That there was
Sure.
the world was slightly less worse. And I don't know that kind of thing in particular exists in any other area of the arts, except like the music that I was interested in. That's a huge part of it. It's survival, and it's like dignity, and it's fairness, and it's the end of oppression. All the things that wreck humanity. Like,
Sure.
let's get rid of those. So that's in that kind of music. And I think it's sort of unfortunately not dealt with like that. And that's why a lot of things get discounted. Like, I have to think about at the conservatory, people don't studied jazz from 1935 much,
Okay.
which is a shame. Like,
Yeah.
they might play it, but they don't get into the details of it. They can go, oh yes, 1939 Body and Soul, great tune. Coleman Hawkins, that's a great tune, and we play like that.
Yeah.
But they're willing to go from 1935 to 1965. And as long as it makes sense in terms of harmony up to 1970 and beyond, 1958, 1959 to now, not so much.
Yeah.
Not so much.
Right.
They won't deal with this whole area of music. So, I mean, in some ways, I could complain about that and I could rail against it, which I kind of don't. But in the way I operate, I just make my statements about it.
Sure.
But in an odd way, knowing those things and caring about it is how I make a living.
Yeah. Sure. But it's interesting too because it seems to me in classical music you still have like people follow 12-tone music, which is kind of outside of that realm. Or I'm sure there's all kinds of. I've never really been in classical academia, but there's an idea that there are modern concepts or like new music or something like that follow that's taught in that way.
Yeah, there's a new music component to the
you might
classical
be right.
repertoire.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But you might be right in that people just say, well, I don't know if Ornette Coleman may have intuited this stuff, but who knows if he's, if we need to listen to him specifically.
They don't. I mean, I can tell you, being the kind of musician I am, which is to follow Cecil Taylor and Ornette Coleman, Sonny Murray is one of my heroes. There's a vibe in it, like, well, you don't know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And I mean, I sense it in every aspect of my life. Like, okay, you know what you do on your terms. You don't know what we do. And first off, that's not true. Secondly, it's difficult to deal with. But, imagine like Anthony Braxton, he writes operas and people say like, well, does he really know what he's doing? Does he know how you're supposed to write an opera? I mean, how are you supposed to write an opera?
Yeah.
Who decided that?
Yeah.
And, that's me asking that question, but I can walk out the door and the cops probably aren't going to stop me in the neighborhood. But, other people, it's not the case. And, much more severe things than that happen. And,
sure.
The idea that isn't what we're playing, like that thing isn't part of what we're playing, like that's what this is all about. That doesn't mean that every white kid who plays guitar or trumpet has to constantly think about that. But I don't understand how anyone would survive in this context of music if they didn't understand that.
Sure.
I mean, it doesn't have to be like a religious kind of adoration of it or anything. Like it's not like we have to constantly, carry a banner around it. But there's an element of like respect for people in this that is what I think you play to. We're playing to that.
Right.
We're playing to that. And if that isn't the driving motivation, I think people will get very confused about what's going on. And
Sure.
if that is the driving motivation, you work to overcome your confusion, and it helps you to learn a lot more.
Yeah, and I wonder.
think.
I wonder if free improvisation too has kind of a unique place in that, in the sense that you really have to trust the people that you're with. It is kind of a human thing. It's almost like each individual within the group has to contribute. It's sort of a purely democratic, anarchy or something like that. But everybody has to trust one another in order to play together effectively. It isn't like you can rely on the form or you can rely on the parameters of the music. You have to say, all right, whatever happens in this moment, we have to be on each other's team in some regard.
Well, I use the term operational methodology to describe, what I referred to as 4 seminal methodologies. And those 4 seminal methodologies that I describe as unit structures, harmolodics, triaxiom theory, which is Anthony Braxton's sort of part of his theory. He has a much bigger thing, volume, thousands of pages.
Try to read those books, man, and it's pretty dense.
Yeah, but certain things happen in those 3. And then what I call very broadly European free improvisation. Those are ways that people operate based on somebody's idea. In the first 3, there's a composer kind of director of it. Instigator, organizer, engineer. And then the last one, and that impacts a collective group of people, a community of people. And then the last one is a community of people who've collectively done that. And they all engage in some kind of methodology so that while the unknown is presenting itself to them, what I would call contingencies, things happen and you have to make a decision. They're prepared to make decisions as they confront those things based on a certain mode of practice that they're aware of, and that they're able to consistently reproduce and consistently expand upon. And I think part of the problem with people and their understanding of this is that they're not willing to change the way they try to understand it. It has to be based on harmony, or it has to be based on philosophy, or it has to be based on something other than what it is.
Yeah.
And if you think about it as methodology, well, there's lots of methodology around us that we can compare it to. There's lots of methodology and technology that we can compare it to. There's lots of very deliberate things going on there that create a uniformity in the design and the engineering and the results. And we just need to have another way of talking about it and another way of looking at it so that we can comprehend it. And maybe that'll happen.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know anymore.
Yeah. So if you're playing, let's say you go in and you're doing a performance with any group of people. Do you think in advance what is going to be the methodology in this? Or do you just go into it with your own intuition, your background, your influences, whatever's made you who you are, assuming that everybody else is going to have the same idea? Like, do you look at these things sort of from that viewpoint?
Well, you know how it is that you pretty much know who you're going to play with, right?
Yeah.
And you know what they do?
Right.
Well, I would say that if, for instance, I just worked with a group of people that I would associate with one particular way of improvising, a lot of times in these communities of improvisers, people have a kind of a way of talking like, this is the music, this is it. That's a way of defining what they do. And then you listen to what they do, or you hear them, or you talk to them, you can get an idea of what they're doing. I cross into lots of different communities of people because I try to be as nonlinear about this as I can, and I want to be as versatile as I can, and I want to have as many opportunities to play that demand things of me as I can get. So I'm in a lot of different groups of people, and I've learned to read what's happening based on how I identify what's happening, And so partly I would go on the idea that has began, I would say, in jazz and was differently sort of presented and exemplified in European free improvisation in the sort of ad hoc thing that Derek Bailey and Evan Parker and those guys did, which is to say, well, everybody who comes is a kind of orchestration. Everybody's an orchestra. And so each individual person has certain things that they do. And each individual person has to contend with one another. And so the way they interact is very important. The way they express the pulse is very important. The way they use pitches or sounds, or the way they process melodic ideas, all those things are very important. So in my way of playing, sort of like trying to figure out what tempo people are playing. Are they doing a Latin version of all the things you are, or are they doing, the Artie Shaw version?
Yeah.
They doing the bebop version, or they doing the Jim Hall version of Darn That Dream, or are they doing the I can't think of the guy I was going to Wes Montgomery version. He didn't do that, but maybe he did. Are they doing that version, or are they doing something else? You have to read the signals as they come to you. The way I do it is I listen to much more meta property kinds of things, like the pulse. I listen to how they interact. I listen to what I would say, what's the scheme in what they do? Is it a long scheme? Is it a short scheme? Are they interacting in juxtaposition to one another? Are the materials allowing that? Are there sounds like unvoiced sounds, or are they pitch sounds? Are they playing in phrases? Are they playing in kind of riffs? What are they doing that's going on? And I analyze all that stuff as quickly as I can and try to immerse myself in that kind of mode of practice, and at the same time try to put something else there that will contribute something. But I do find that because I think of it like that, it's difficult for me to walk into a situation and have people change what they're doing for me. Like, that almost never happens.
Okay.
It never happens. I can configure groups of people and rehearse with people, and they can learn how I like to do it, which is based on these kinds of things. But it's kind of a composite of all of those things.
Sure.
And so people have to know all of those things to very comfortably play with me, so we can just improvise, or maybe we use a composition and we improvise. And I've had various versions of that going on that's well represented in my discography, which is now 150 records and growing.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about
growing,
that. That's
yeah.
a lot of albums.
So I haven't repeated myself, because I can take the overall sort of design of all these kinds of things and have that be the music.
Right.
And it's different if I play with, I've been lucky. I got to record duos with Anthony Braxton and also with Evan Parker, and they're very different. you
Sure.
know? And I wouldn't say that I've given up anything. I just read what they're doing. Now, when you play with Braxton, he's doing the same thing. Braxton is like a processor. I mean, he is unlimited in what he will do and what he wants. He is totally open to what's going on, partly because he's so organized and he's such a nonlinear thinker.
Yeah.
Evan's awesome as well, but Evan has a very deliberate kind of thing he does. So there's a lot of flexibility within that, but it doesn't change. And so
Sure.
you're going to get Evan Parker on a good day or Evan Parker on a bad day, and you're going to have to find a way to contend with that. And so the idea to be able to improvise and have a variety of results based on who you play with, or what I'm trying to do now is play with a lot of the same people and have a lot of variety of results, which is something I did earlier in my, I guess you call it a career,
Sure.
earlier, decades ago, where I wrote different kinds of pieces to create a different kind of template for us to work in. And so I kind of read what's there. I read the properties of free music. I read what properties are in play.
Sure.
So when I talk about the properties of free music, I mean it in a practical, like, here's how we're going to play kind of way. It's not like a philosophical
Right, of
thing.
course,
It's
yeah.
like saying, here's the changes.
Yeah.
Here's the changes. Here's how we navigate, over a 2-5-1. It's the same kind of thing, except that's what you do now to be able to play. It gives you a good understanding of how to read what's going on. And you were in my ensemble, so you remember me saying, now listen to how the drums are accenting the pulse here.
Yeah.
If you play along with the drums, you'll be more harmonic, because harmonics is about the drums.
Right.
So is unit structures in a different kind of way. So
Sure.
I try to get everybody to have a very practical, like musical, technique-based understanding of what free improvisation is. So
Yeah.
they base it on how everyone's playing,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
not anything bigger than that.
Yeah. So, are you thinking in terms of this is sort of, you're thinking about these things specifically in preparation for improvisation? To what degree are you thinking in the moment?
Well, I'd say everything I just said is happening in the moment.
Sure. But you're relying on this thing that, okay, well, here's all these things that I've listened for and listened to, and I understand that this is the parameters of the music, or these are the properties. Then in the moment, you have that as sort of your vocabulary, maybe not in the
Maybe
not-
in your expectations,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
what
yeah.
you know so far. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I like that idea that, like, improvising. I mean, I have a very practical sense of what improvising is. That it's making a spontaneous decision when confronted with some contingency.
Sure.
So you might be sitting there playing, and you think, "Oh, we're doing this," and then something else comes along. Well, then it's a question of how I respond to that. So if I have a very long scheme expectation, like, okay, we're going to go and it's going to be like this, and it doesn't happen, well, it's not going to work. So I have a very short scheme.
Yeah.
I listen in very short durations so that I can respond. And by doing that, I have to say that one of the reasons I still like playing music is that I'm in situations a lot where I have kind of no idea what to do. Like, when I get there, maybe the best example of this, but this is an ongoing thing, and it's the same as playing with Anthony Braxton, which I haven't gotten to do enough, but when I have, it's been amazing. I play with Faye Victor, who's a fantastic vocalist and one of the most open-minded people I ever met in music. And she put together this group with me, Sam Newsom, who's like that and is a wizard of saxophone, soprano in particular,
Mm-hmm.
and Reggie Nicholson, who is also like that. And these are like incredible musicians. I have no idea what's going to happen, except that I have no idea what's going to happen. Like
Sure.
we start and something goes on, and we trust each other and work together, and we hear what everyone does very respectfully. And Faye, being the leader, organizer of the band, sometimes she brings in some compositions, but we sort of pivot off of her at least a lot. And she's so open that we all just listen to each other. And sometimes we're in perfect unison. Sometimes we're in extreme juxtaposition. And everybody has a sort of unspoken way of understanding that this is the music we're making. And
Yeah.
I haven't done a gig with them that was close to being the same way twice. And it not because one became a bossa nova gig and the next one became a
Right.
free jazz. It's just that this happens, that happens, this happens, this happens. We find a spot, we lay out, we interact in all the ways you can. And there's a trust that this is what we're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
That this is the gig. And I really think it's one of the best things I've ever done in my life. And the fact that it also has it's also soulful and it's political and it grooves and it's noisy. She calls the group sound, noise, funk. And it's all those things, but never like any kind of predictable version of that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one example of me being able to actually improvise with people. And,
Sure.
and I would say all the time, and maybe most especially when I'm one-on-one with a student or in a group of people who are students who are learning how to do this, I'm listening to them. I'm trying to play what everybody's bringing to it. I'm not saying, here's what to do. We may have talked about it because I'm the teacher. Here's what we're going to try to do. Once we get going, we have to respect each other. We have to listen to what's going on. We have to process what it is and have some ways of dealing with it. And those solutions have to be sort of governed by a consistently kind of mutable approach to everything. We have to be able to transform everything we hear and what we play and violate our own expectations
Sure.
constantly.
Yeah.
That's the best part. That's when you learn how to do things you never did before.
Yeah.
So I would say that one of the best things about my life as a guitar player is that I've been consistently in situations that had no guitar part, and I've been allowed to put the guitar part there.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing. That I didn't really understand that until maybe 10 years ago, but that's what I've done. I play with people, go, okay, they ask me to play with them, and then I have to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
And so all of it has been like an invention on the spot based on what's going on, and having like not wanting to rely on what anybody said I was supposed to do.
Sure.
I guess they wouldn't call me for that. I don't know.
Yeah. And that sounds like that keeps you out of the trap of repeating yourself or of falling into your own, because no matter what you do, whether you're playing changes or playing free music or whatever, you could fall into your own cliches in some regard or fall into your own habits or something like that.
I mean, we all do. I can hear myself doing things that I have done a million times, but they don't always. I have to think beyond that as much as I can. I mean, I want to give the impression that I've never repeated myself. I think we all have a default, or like I said in the book, we can only play what we know how to play, but we can also learn something on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
I like being in a situation where I have to learn things on the spot a lot on every gig. And, I like to work with people who are happy playing that way.
Sure.
I really don't, I've already been through the thing of, working with people that were miserable. I don't really want to do that
Right.
anymore.
Yeah.
I like it to be a happy adventure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And fun and open. And I don't have the expectation that anything is the music.
Sure.
I just don't. I just think like it's a perpetual frontier. That's what I call the book.
Yeah.
And I mean that. Like yesterday I played, I have a student named Michael LaRocca, who's a terrific young drummer here yesterday, who used a lot of different sound palette on his kit. I mean, he's organizing things. He's a terrific young musician.
Mm-hmm.
And we're lately we've been getting into like how do we deal with groove more, where some people go, well, we're never going to. That's over.
Sure.
And I think I've said this to people like, so what? We're never gonna think of all the things that we can do that are great that we're never gonna do them again.
Yeah.
You know,
Sure. But you want to be able to incorporate all that stuff into you want to be able to
Yeah,
draw from everything.
how do we make it meaningful again?
Sure.
Well, let's try. Let's see what we get, and maybe we'll fail. Maybe it'll be obvious. Maybe there's something about it that will cause some people to go, oh, I don't care about this.
Hmm.
Oh well, that's the risk you take.
Yeah.
Trying to be creative. It's part of it's an adventure if you do it like that. Otherwise, it's over. You're
Yeah.
going to do what you've been doing your whole life like it's a product, and you either have, it's either a good version of it or a bad version, and that's it.
Sure. Yeah.
Adventure's over.
Yeah. But it's a high risk, high reward kind of approach to music because you have nothing to fall back on.
It's at least an artistically high rewarding thing.
You're right.
It's a tough thing to try to do it like that, because in a way you're asking everybody in the room to go with you, everybody in the room to be able to hear things differently. But I also think that's a big part of what this is. And I think it goes back to it having its sources in African music, that music in at least in a traditional sense in Africa was about marking time. History is stored in music and melodies and rhythms and songs, and certainly in every culture where music is used like that, and in African music. And so in a way, if you do something that you never heard before, and the people in the room are receptive to it, they have an experience that marks that moment in time, and they can't have that any other way. And yeah, and so we don't have to define the whole thing for everybody. People listening to it defines it as much as what we do. Like if they say, well, while that happened, I thought about something, or I want to go home and write a story, or, it made me feel really good, or, it really confused the hell out of me. They're basically saying something happened while this went on. And I think that's what we're really trading in. We're really trading in creating a sense of music that people can't just reflect on the past about.
Sure.
They have to be right in the moment with it. And if we can remind them that their experience with it as it's happening to them, as they're listening to it, is a very valuable, important part of it. That's what we're trying to get everybody to experience. It makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
And otherwise we go, well, this is our music and it comes from this and it's about this. And if you don't know this, you're a square.
Yeah, right.
You shouldn't be listening to it. We're discounting having an actively configured audience in front of us. We're saying you should know what went on in 1958. How would they,
Yeah.
So if we invite everybody to be as spontaneous about their listening as we're trying to be about our music, then it's still a real thing. And that's one of the reasons why I keep doing it, because if I have 10 people in the room and I play for 10 people a lot still, those 10 people might walk away and go, well, that was different. Whereas if there's 10,000 people, they're going to come to hear me do something they know about.
Sure. And that's really that's certainly an element of going to hear people play fully improvised music at any time, is that's a unique performance. Yeah. That's the only time you're going to hear that performance. It's not to say that every rock performance is going to be, precisely the same, but you're going to hear the same songs and you're going to hear the stuff that you know from the record. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's cool too. And that can be it's interesting that you put it as this is a mark in time, because that's what people remember is, oh, that show that I went to and that experience that I had in that one moment, and that can define a whole, let's say, couple years of your life as being like, that was the year that I was into this and I went to go see this. But free music is you're going to see that in the moment right now. It's 1 minute's music in 1 minute's time.
Yeah.
And that's the experience you're going to have then.
Yeah, and the way the listener reflects on that experience is what the music is about.
Yeah.
It's not the other way. The configuration to get it there, well, that's interesting to those of us who are musicians, and it can be interesting to everybody. But we don't want that to be more important than the fact that somebody comes away with some sense of their own experience, their own inspiration, their own determination, maybe, you know, their own critique of it.
Sure.
And if it's a unique version of that, if we're dealing with people that we invite to have that, or if we invite people that we're dealing with to have that experience, and they're cool enough to let it happen, which is not always the case.
Sure.
And that's one of the reasons why we have to play to a small group of people, because there just aren't that many people there that are that with it all the time.
Sure.
We can't say, here's what you're supposed to think as you walk in the door. If we go, tell us what you think.
Yeah.
People have a different experience with things, and they like to be invited to do that. And I think, again, that's one of the problems with music now. It's almost like, especially for people younger than me who didn't have the experience of all that coming together. It's sort of the boomer generation inflicting everything on younger
Maybe,
people,
sure.
going, this is what's cool. This is what we used to do. You know, I mean, you turn on the radio in the car and they're still playing the James Gang from 1973. I mean, I didn't want to hear that then. That stuff is awful. You know, I heard that. I heard that when the time I went to see Led Zeppelin, that band opened for him, and I thought, well, that's awful. And then I listened to Led Zeppelin, and I was like, this is also awful. You know, I'm surprised how much I don't like this. I went home and listened to Albert Eiler, or, you know, got more into that after that, and it's like, you know, this is better.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the hell's going on in this. It took me years to figure out anything, and it's still a mystery. It's still a mystery.
Sure. Yeah.
So, which is not to say that it's better, but it means that every time I listen to it, I can reflect on who I am as a person. I don't have to go, well, back in the 70s, I really loved this, and all my friends and I, we were so cool in our bell bottoms. You know, I can go, okay, it's a sort of vessel, you know, some kind of mnemonic device in a way for me to sort of see myself, and you know, I like things that surprise me, and some things that are incomprehensible in a way continue to surprise me.
Yeah. And I wish that there were more people in the general public who could make their way to the Outpost to see, you know, some show that they didn't expect. When I was in high school, I used to bring my friends to go see The Fringe on Monday nights.
Oh, you did?
And
did you live up there? I didn't.
Yeah,
know.
I lived in north of Boston.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
so we'd go in on Monday. I don't even know how we managed it, because we'd go see them, and then we'd wake up at 6 a.m. to go to school or whatever. We'd be
So you were
getting
like
back
me.
at 1. Yeah. We would go in and check it out, and it
You were
would
an
blow
out
our
kid.
mind for sure. But I'd bring my friends who weren't musicians at all, and they all took something out of it as well.
Right.
I mean, it's not a music.
Maybe more so.
Yeah, certainly. And none of us knew what was going on. I mean,
Yeah.
it was totally mind-blowing every time. And every time we see, you know, free music in whatever capacity, but it's the kind of thing that it's not specific to musicians. It's not like we're sitting around analyzing this stuff. Oh, it's really interesting the way that he played the such and such over the whatever.
Yeah.
It's like you can go in there and feel the emotion of it. You know, it'd be great if we could get more people in the Outpost to check this out and get their minds blown. It's not for everybody. I mean, some people may not, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sticky thing to try to hope that it'll be popular, because look what happens to stuff that gets popular.
Sure.
I mean, now more than ever. You know, it's
Right.
it's you know what I mean?
It's an interesting
It's
point.
you know, yikes! There's something precious about it being, you know, such a small, rarefied. I guess that's the word. It's like a rarefied culture to be involved in, and you know, there's a way to be snooty about that, but it's not easy to be snooty about something when you're one of 5 people in the room. You know.
Sure.
And you know, sometimes nobody's making any money, and people are doing it out of the love that they have for the experience of doing it, whether they're listening or they're playing. You know, that part of it, you know, there's a reward in that is an intangible reward. And like so many things that people talk about, the only way to experience that reward is to be involved in it. And yet people will, you know, put pressure on you and say, well, you can't make any money at that. Yeah, but, you know, you can make money. You know, you can make a lot of money building bombs, but doesn't really give you any other kind of reward.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
you know, the big money is in some pretty destructive stuff, and maybe every now and then, you know, you make a nice pizza and people like it or something. But But you know, like this is like our lives,
right?
Know?
It's not really the point of the whole thing.
Yeah. So
right.
You know, I remember being young, you know, and thinking, well, if I could do this and eat, I got it beat. You know, I really like I'm in good shape. And
sure.
fortunately, I've been able to eat, and I've done okay. And I also like, my family situation is cool. My wife is the same kind of way. She'd rather be creative every day, and like be out in the woods, or be able to think than have things. Even
Sure.
though we have plenty of things, we're fine. But she says, like, some people are producers and some are consumers. Well, some people in the audience are producers,
Hmm.
and some people are consumers. And it's not to say that we can't survive without consumers, but I don't want to be a musician who is somehow consuming stuff and not producing anything,
Sure. Yeah.
And so I'll take the trade. I try to produce some information that I can share with young people, so I can teach, so I can get paid, and so that I can make some music that I can share with some other people. And
Yeah.
that's worked out, well. It's funny too, because like you teach at a place like NEC, and there are people there who are on the Boston Symphony Orchestra teaching. They're doing better than all of us improvisers. They're still teaching.
Sure.
So they have an extra day, so they're teaching.
Yeah.
And they're not doing it for charity. They're getting paid.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's part of how you apply your trade as a musician. Like, you play weddings, maybe you teach kids, you teach in a college, you play in the symphony, you play it, and then at the end, you play a jazz gig, or you play the music that you totally love.
Yeah.
And I think people forget that. I remember it a lot because I'm almost up to being the second half of 100 years of there being an improvising musician in my family. My Uncle John started playing the drums professionally in 1920. I know he recorded in 1924.
Wow.
Yeah. And
What did he play? Jazz?
he played drums. Yeah, he played jazz. He was a singer. He played with Paul Speck. He played with Vincent Lopez, Tony Pastor. He was like a swing guy and an early jazz guy. He played with Eddie Lang and Joe Venuti and the Dorsey brothers and Adrian Rollini and all those heavy guys.
Sure.
And he, in his day, he worked. They had an orchestra that played before silent movies. There was like the Pit Orchestra, and then he played like dinner, dancing kind of thing at a hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And when radio came in, he'd do radio instead of the movie thing, because that was over, and play in the dinner, dancing, and then a concert or something like that. He played in orchestra pits, and then he'd go and do jazz gigs.
Yeah.
And so he used all of his skills as a musician, and he played drums, and he was a singer, and so he wasn't just, he, in a way, he's maybe even better known as a singer, and he did fine, and he didn't give up making money because he wanted to play jazz. He made money and he played jazz.
Yeah. Well, you got to survive for sure.
Yeah, and that's another thing I tell young people, like, do everything. Don't let it wreck your life. Don't let any part of this wreck your life. Like, we already learned that.
Yeah.
We already learned that can happen if you get too perfect about all this. Like,
Yeah.
good people should have a good life, and have family in it, and be able to go to the doctor and eat
Sure.
well and have a safe environment. And nothing about the kind of thing I do is worth giving that up. There's ways to have. I moved pianos and played music.
Yeah.
I had a job as an estimator at a moving company for years, while I made 5 records a year for different record labels, including one for ECM, and went to Europe a bunch of times. I
Sure.
managed to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
And having grown up with no money and having no support financially from anybody in my family, I had to work. And I figured out, by being able to, by working and playing music, I developed like carpentry skills, so I could buy a house and fix it up.
Sure.
Yeah. Some things about the limitations of music enabled me to make my life better because I had to confront a bunch of different things.
Sure.
And I think there's a lot of ways to be very pure about a particular musical direction and not have a negative impact on your life.
Right. Sure. Didn't you move a piano for Jackie McLean once?
I did move. No, I didn't move a piano for Jackie McLean. I don't think there was a piano in it, but I moved his furniture one time on Martha's Vineyard. I worked for this crazy guy. He's a great character. And he said one day, I got this shipment coming in from Connecticut for this guy, Jackie McLean. It's got to be delivered this afternoon. Who wants to take it? And I said, wait, Jackie McLean, the saxophone player? This is in 1980? Yeah. He goes, yeah, I think so. He's a black guy from Hartford. I was like, yeah, that's Jackie McLean.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, you want to take it? And I said, yeah. So I went over and moved his furniture in and hung out with him for the afternoon. It was really, yeah, I did. I told you that story, huh? Yeah.
Yep.
It was super cool. He was really nice. And, he and Dolly, his wife, were, I remember saying it was like, I Love Lucy or something. I mean, they were, she said, Jackie, you want me to make you a sandwich? And he said, yeah, would you make me a sandwich, baby? It was super sweet to each other. It was this really beautiful home.
Yeah.
It was like a vacation home. And they made sandwiches for us and let us hang around for a while. And I talked to him about Elvis Costello, who he liked, and the art ensemble. He told me stories about, some of these stories are well known, but he told me about the first time he played with Miles, and about how much he didn't like Charles Mingus. Told me all these stories. It was very cool. It was
perk of the job,
It was very cool.
funny.
Yeah, it was. I asked him. I said, "What's it like to be like a legend of jazz? Like you're like a legend."
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and he wasn't like the first guy I'd met like that, but it was a particularly it was a different situation. I think he was really surprised because he said, "How do you know about me?" I said, "Well, I'm a musician. I mean, I know a lot about you. I listen to a lot of your records." He said, "Oh, I don't really know, man. I don't really know I can't really say how I feel about being a legend. I mean, I'm just like living my life,
Yeah. That's funny.
But he told me a lot of stuff that day. I guess I asked him a lot of questions, and he was very, very forthcoming, very open about it all.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So how'd you go from moving stuff to teaching at NEC?
Well, that's a good question. Anybody listening to me talk knows that I can talk, and sometimes I make sense. And so, following again in the sort of lead of my heroes, people like Braxton, Wadada, Cecil, Ornette. I would say there's been a lot of need in my approach to this to be able to articulate what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And being on my own and not being part of a trained community of musicians, I often had to explain myself to musicians that would play with me in I would say I had to configure the way I explained myself.
Sure.
And yet I got good results from the musicians I played with. And none of them knew this kind of thing. I played with an incredible bass player named Sebastian Steinberg, who was maybe, the most intuitive, just like friend I ever played with. He was a phenomenal bass player. And Mark Harvey, who ran the Music at the Church series, introduced me to Sebastian, and I hit it off. We hit it off. We were really good friends, and we played a lot of stuff, and I bring in pieces and we'd play them, and I never really had to tell him anything. He just played. After that, when he was gone, he went to New York and got busy, and I couldn't play with him anymore. I had people that would come, and I have to explain the whole thing to them.
Yeah.
And some of them didn't like that I was explaining it to them, and some of them thought I should be able to explain it to them differently, but none of them knew what I wanted until I explained it to them.
Sure.
And I guess from that, I learned to sort of write about it, and so I wrote some things about it, and I was interviewed quite a bit. And
where'd you write about it?
I wrote liner notes about it.
I
I did a bunch of interviews. During the 90s, I had a lot of press, and I guess I got a reputation. Well, not only did I get a reputation for being, hard-headed and being very opinionated, I also got a reputation as somebody who could explain what I was doing.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, I spoke to some people about, at a certain point, I said, well, I think I need to teach because, I couldn't do the day job anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them, actually, was the cellist Daniel Levin, who you might know. Yeah. He was at NEC, and he asked Alan Chase, who was the department chair, the jazz department chair, if he could study with me. And I knew Alan from the scene in Boston, but not well. I had subbed for his ensemble a couple of times, and he told me at one point if he ever had the chance to hire me, he would. But that was years. I had taught at Tufts at the Experimental College on the advice of Lewis Porter, who's a great musician and scholar, who I knew as a friend. And I did some stuff around Tufts University, but I wasn't attending Tufts. And he said, you should teach. There's an experimental open college. You should submit a syllabus and a course description and apply. And so they hired me. So I taught this course. And the syllabus for that course is essentially the outline for the book, The Properties of Free Music. So
Okay.
that's how I was thinking.
Yeah.
And so I had kind of a reputation as somebody who who had done a lot of stuff. At the time, I already had quite a bit of records out. I'd been around the world, and I got a lot of good press. And so Alan said to Daniel, yeah, you can study with him. And he called me up. He said, this is not going to change your life, but you can have one student every 2 weeks. And I said, okay. And I hung up, but I thought, this is going to change my life. and so I got hired, and they put me on the faculty. And word spread that I could explain some of this stuff, and I started getting more students. And it took a few years, and then after a couple of years, maybe two, I had a couple of ensembles. The first year I had ensembles, I had, I think, 3 ensembles, and I still have 3 ensembles. And my studio started building up, and then so it sort of just worked like that. It was like I had a reputation locally, at least. I was in Boston, so that helped.
Yeah.
And as somebody who could actually do this thing that wasn't being done there. They had one guy that they sort of let teach there, but they didn't pay, who was pretty controversial, and he was covering this sort of free improvisation way in I would say quite a different way than I did it. And so I think Alan saw it as a chance to give me a shot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took it as like, precious. I mean, I take every moment in that place as like a precious, miraculous gift that here I am, I better do something with it. And the cool thing about it is that they let me.
Yeah.
They let me. I mean, people haven't asked me what I do. Like nobody on the faculty, no one's ever said, so what do you do, Joe? Like the students do.
Yeah.
I don't think they ask each other. It's just this kind of consortium of like independent, like kind of planets that somehow impact the student body.
Sure.
And so that's how I got hired. I was invited to join the faculty, which is
Pretty good. Yeah.
good.
It's pretty good. I mean, it seems like everything kind of came together at the same time in that regard. And it,
I mean,
you've built up this whole sort of way of discussing it, or way of thinking about the music,
Yeah.
and you've been entrenched in that style for so long.
yeah.
I mean, it's got to be, your teaching there has to be a result of your sort of uncompromising approach to that music as well. I mean, in the sense that you dove direct in. You didn't say, I'm going to do this for fun sometimes, and I'm also going to play weddings, or I'm going to try to get a gig in whoever's, it's like you had to really commit to that.
I mean, there are
world.
other people who, Alan Chase is one of them. He's a pretty remarkable. He's Dominique's husband, by the way, Dominique Eads.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
He's an amazing player.
He's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, he's one of my heroes as a thinker
Sure.
because he knows everything.
Yeah.
I mean, he can do what I do. So I mean, part of him, part of what's cool about the whole experience is that, and Alan being a very generous person, very, I don't know if generous is the right word, but he acknowledges what people have. He's a very positive person, and he could have said, well, I could teach you what Joe would teach you. He could have done that, but he didn't do that. And he's also the kind of person who knows that the unique, he's like the rare, truly academic, scholarly jazz historian, master musician who also understands that there's a part of this that is personal, that, if you don't connect with that, you don't get it. Like he is the absolute rarest of the rare people. He's also modest so that he doesn't overwhelm everybody with those traits, the fact that he has those traits. And I think everybody that knows him feels that way about him.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm not the only one. He's well known as a special kind of person, but so I think he knew that I was hardcore.
Sure.
I would
Yeah,
say
yeah.
that people have known I'm hardcore about this stuff, and my hardcore uh, commitment to this, can bother a lot of people. It can bother a lot of people, and I would say sometimes it's my fault that it's bothered, and sometimes it's their fault,
Sure.
and sometimes it's cool. But this is a thorny little topic. It's a contested area. It's a fine art, and people don't take it lightly.
Yeah.
And there's certainly people who wouldn't think that I would have I don't deserve to have anything good happen because I haven't done anything the way I'm supposed to. And like I always say, I tell people about how for years people have come up to me and say, "Well, how do you get to do this? You don't play like this person and that person and that person and this person and that person." And I go, "Well, that's how."
Sure.
They don't go, "Hey, it's cool. You don't play like all these people." Instead it's like you're supposed to and you're failing at it. So that means you're disqualified from doing it. They don't get the point. I
Right.
think where I've been lucky is that some people get that point. They get that like having your own ideas is actually what we're looking for.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
you can't base that on what could happen in the future. We don't, nobody, you're a great trumpet player, Bobby.
Thanks.
If no one could say, by the way, you should be like Miles Davis was when he was 50 years old. Like if they do that, you have no business playing. Like that's a
Sure.
completely irrational expectation to have on
Yeah.
somebody.
And I'm not Miles Davis at 50.
And you never will be.
And I
You'll
won't be.
You'll be you at
Right.
50
And it
years
isn't
old. It's irrelevant.
1960 or 1970, whatever,
Yeah.
however old it was.
It's an irrelevant way of looking at stuff. But some people look at it like that.
Sure.
And then some people don't.
Yeah.
And so I guess I've been lucky that I've been able to be around people who don't.
Sure.
And that's worked out. That's worked out pretty well. I also, one of the great things about teaching at a place like NEC is that I don't have to know everything. I don't have to be the expert on changes. I know changes, but would never compare myself to Jerry Bergonzi or John McNeil.
Sure.
Those guys are giants, right?
Yeah.
You don't need to know that.
Sure.
I can work with people who are new to it, and I can help them get through it and navigate over chord changes and play tunes out of the real book. And I do that quite a bit in the CI department. I do that a lot. But if it comes to a different level, I go, you need to go and study with Jerry.
Sure.
Because why that you're not going to do better than that. And that's a cool thing about being there. That if you want to learn about aleatoric composition, even though I'm a free improvisation guy, I'm not the person to talk to about that.
Right.
Go study with Anthony Coleman. He's an expert on that.
Sure.
He's in the next room.
Yeah.
Go do that. So I think some people, when they think about this kind of education, they think that somebody is going to possess all the information about everything. And there might be a few people like that. I don't know. I don't know. There
Probably
might, probably not though. I can't think of anybody who is like that. I never have
And
known
you don't
anybody.
even want that because then you're going to only get a minutia of each. You could know everything, but you can only know a little bit about it. You got to pick and choose
or
what
like
you're
have a
getting yourself
good
into.
functional understanding. Actually,
Yeah.
Alan would be
Right. I was thinking him. Yeah, he'd be the closest. For sure.
He'd be the closest.
Yeah.
He's the closest I can think of to that. And but that also comes with there's a certain kind of hubris that you have to. He wouldn't
sure.
waste his time having that. So
Yeah.
some people are above that too. So I don't know. It's interesting.
Sure. Yeah. So to wrap it up, if somebody wants to get into the world of free improvisation and follow a path, do you have any advice for younger people trying to figure it out?
Yeah, well, play what you feel. Study all of the examples that exist. You're not doing it in a vacuum. You're not going to invent the idiom.
Sure.
Part of the problem in teaching it and some of the conflicts I have with how some people teach it is that they sort of say to young people, okay, it's just free, just play free. Like, okay, then what? And they don't know what to do. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Well, it's not free. It's a series of methodologies.
Sure.
And you may be lucky enough to make a combination of methodologies. You may be lucky enough to develop a methodology. But you're doing yourself a very bad disservice if you don't learn what exists. And to do that, you have to, like I said, you have to respect the people who created it and pay attention to what they did. And a good start for that is buy my book, Perpetual
There you
Frontier,
go.
The Properties of Free Music, which is Reedy Publishing. And it's available from squidco.com and catalyticsound.com and onfidelity.com
Great book.
if you want to buy it. And it will get you going on a lot of that stuff. And I'd say the other thing is to engage with it as an adventure and do what you can to respect yourself and the people you're involved with while you risk failure. Because if you think you're not going to fail in one way or another, you're not really dealing with it. This is
Sure.
about risking the way people perceive you and risking the way people understand you. You can fall back on what everyone believes is good, at which point you're probably not really doing it. If you can decide that something is good, but maybe it doesn't make sense to everybody else, you might be closer to it. There's a component of failure, the risk of failure, that can help you to learn how to improve on it. I'd say the other thing is, while you're doing all this stuff, record yourself. Everybody has a tape recorder in their phone now.
Sure.
It was a big deal back in the day to just be able to record yourself. But listen to yourself and find out what you do and see what parts of what you do are worthy of expansion. I think if there's something in your own playing that you like and you can comprehend it and identify it, then you'll know how to build on it. And you'll know how to edit out the parts that are meaningless to you, because you want to get a higher percentage of intentional material in your own playing, things that matter to you, that you believe in, that you think speak about who you are. This is all about putting ourselves out there in music and being able to declare who we are in the world. Be a good person so that what you declare has something of value to somebody, whatever that means. I don't know that I'm a good person, but I just know that I try to be a good person. And so if you have something that attempts to align itself with better things, people will respond to it.
Yeah. Great.
That answer your question?
Sure does.
Yeah, good.
Sure does.
Thanks, man.
Yep. Perfect. So if people want to find out where you're playing all the time, where do they go?
I don't know. I mean, Facebook.
Sure.
You
Okay.
can find me on Facebook. That's the easiest way. I post things on Facebook. Years ago, this is quick. I was in New York and a guy walked up to me and he said, I'm always trying to find out where you play, but you don't post it anywhere. And I said, at the time I live out here in the woods, I got kids, my wife, and I'm on tour for weeks at a time. I don't really want to know everybody. I don't want everybody in the world to know that I'm not home.
Sure.
So I wouldn't tell everybody. I just did the gigs, and I said to the guy, well, maybe I don't want anybody to know where I am. And then I walked away, and I realized it was one of the critics from the New York Times. That was dumb. So I post things on Facebook. That's the best way
Sure.
to find out what I'm doing. And
Yeah.
I don't always, I do. Sometimes I do a lot, so that the things are done in a short notice, and other times there's a little bit more notice. But I don't bombard Facebook with a constant self-promotion thing. I kind of don't like to do that.
No doubt. Yeah. Well, they'll find
Keep
you.
your eyes peeled.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, thanks a lot,
Thanks,
Joe. I
Bobby.
appreciate
Thanks,
you doing
man.
it.